So the great Carroll Shelby is going to build a car to beat Ferrari with a Ford.
Correct.
The 24 Hours of Le Mans. There's no more legendary race in the history of motorsports. It spans over a century, a race that's not just about speed and cornering, but also about endurance, about pushing limits in the environment as challenging as it can be. It hosts the biggest names of the automotive industry. But that's not what made it what it is today. It's the stories. The history of Le Mans is history of unbelievable stories, from the initial story of two enthusiasts, Charles Furreau and George Durand, who established the most prestigious race in the world through the early days of Bentley's and Alfa Romeo's dominance. But Le Mans has never been just a story about triumph. It was always known for its dark side, for events like the 1955 incident that took more than 80 lives. Then there's the story of dominance, as Porsche dominated in the 1970s, as well as the story of Great Disturb that showed that, with enough enthusiasm and commitment, even a small company like Mazda can win. Later years once again brought stories about dominance, Audis, and then Toyotas. Finally, the most recent years marked big returns of the most prominent participants, so it looks like Le Mans is going through its best years again. You probably noticed that we missed something. Years of Ferrari's dominance and the great upset that followed, when an American automaker, never known for performance before, disturbed the world. Of course, we are talking about the glorious days of Ford GT, Ken Miles, Carroll Shelby, and the crew. We think we know all about that fascinating story, but here's what it is. We don't. This is the only true story about the iconic duel, with details you didn't see in the movie. Let's begin. One of the first events that the movie covers is negotiations between Ford and Ferrari, where the scene ends with Enzo directly insulting Henry Ford II. Not only that he rejected Ford's buyout offer, but also delivers a personal attack, calling Ford unworthy of his grandfather's legacy. It's one of the major turning points in the film, a moment when Ford decides to pursue victory at Le Mans on its own. Clearly, all this was added for storytelling impact, to paint this duel as a deeply personal vendetta. But you know what really happened? Enzo Ferrari never took part in these negotiations. Ford's executives, Don Frey and Roy Lunn, negotiated through intermediaries. The deal collapsed primarily because Ferrari wanted to retain full control over its racing division, which Ford was unwilling to allow. So Ferrari walked away and secured a partnership with Fiat. But there is no record of humiliating Ford II. It was all for the sake of dramatic embellishment, meant to add an extra dose of emotional weight to the film. Furthermore, that dramatic scene of the Italian photographer rushing to Gianni Agnelli to inform him about Ford's negotiations with Ferrari most likely never happened. Still, we can't say we didn't like this added moment for dramatic effect, which emphasized the high-stakes nature of negotiations and Ferrari's swift move to secure an alternative deal. Here comes another part of the story that shows a significant difference when you compare what they put in the movie and what really happened. If you watch the movie, you know this is one of the most important scenes, a defining moment for Ken Miles, where he has to prove his worth by defying Ford executives and dominating the race. The film shows a dramatic rivalry between Miles and Lloyd Ruby, with corporate heads favoring Ruby due to Miles' rebellious nature. In the film, Miles was ordered to hold back, but in a bold act of defiance, he pushes his GTO 40 to the limits, overtaking Ruby and ensuring victory. What really happened there is unknown, but there is no strong evidence of any conspiracy against Miles or any orders for him to hold back. Actually, Ford dominated the race, with Miles and Ruby taking the overall victory thanks to a well-executed team strategy. So, what the movie does is exaggerating the tension between the two drivers, all in order to reinforce Miles' underdog narrative to make the eventual Le Mans heartbreak even more dramatic. This certainly is one of the most controversial parts of the movie. Played by Josh Lucas, BB is portrayed as a key antagonist in the movie, as a Ford executive who continuously undermines Ken Miles' efforts. He's been portrayed as a typical corporate figure with a desire for control who is constantly at odds with Shelby and Miles. Throughout the entire movie, he acts as a foil to Miles's rebellious spirit, as a person who creates much of the drama and conflict in the movie. He is a villainous figure responsible for denying Miles his moment of glory. In reality, Beebe was indeed a Ford executive who played a significant role in the company's racing strategy. He did make some decisions based on marketing and public relation considerations, but his character was exaggerated in pretty much every way, for dramatic effect. There is no evidence that he disliked Miles or deliberately sought to sabotage him. The tension between these two was probably a product of different priorities, corporate versus passion for racing. But we can't say there was a conflict as the movie presents. No, the depiction of Beebe as an antagonist has a pretty clear purpose: to heighten the emotional stakes and position him as a barrier between Miles's talent and the recognition he deserves. Ken Miles's loss at the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans is easily the most heartbreaking moment and the emotional climax of the film. In the movie, Ford executives, eager for a dramatic visual finish, order Miles to slow down and allow two other Ford cars to catch up and create a Stage 3 car finish. Miles is instructed to hold back and finish in a way that maximizes the impact of Ford's victory. In the film, this decision is presented as a direct betrayal of Miles's skill and effort, as he is denied the individual victory rightfully earned, with the officials later declaring another Ford driver, McLaren, the winner, due to the distance covered by each car during the race. But things weren't that dramatic in real life. There was no corporate interference, but rather a technicality, as the regulations stated that the winner was the car that covered the most distance. McLaren simply started farther down the grid and therefore covered a greater distance. And while this part of the story is undeniable, the thing is that the decision to slow Miles down was not the central reason for his loss. Actually, he continued to drive aggressively and was on the track to win the race outright until the rule regarding distance was applied. So we can conclude that the movie's portrayal of the situation simplifies and intensifies the story, for the sake of dramatic effect, framing the race as an unfair setback for Miles. In the movie, Miles's death occurs shortly after the Le Mans race, and we presume that the director's idea was to show how Miles never got to enjoy the fruits of its success. Such timing is there to add an emotional layer to the story, portraying his loss as a devastating consequence of the sacrifices he made. It's a typical example of poetic injustice, with Miles not only losing the win he deserved, but also dying before his contribution would be fully appreciated by the public. Once again, the reality was a little bit different. Miles did die during a test drive of the new Ford J car, but that happened several months after Le Mans. During the test, the car's rear suspension failed, causing a fatal crash. Miles was testing the J car for Ford when the incident occurred, and his death was unrelated to the events of Le Mans. The whole set of circumstances in the movie was there for the dramatic effect, placing his death in closer proximity to Le Mans to emphasize the tragedy of his character's journey. The movie portrays Carroll Shelby as the central figure in the Ford GT40's development. Moreover, the movie shows him as a maverick working independently from Ford's management. Shelby is the mastermind behind design and testing, collaborating closely with Ken Miles to perfect it. Of course, that's the freedom creators of the film took to highlight Shelby's passion for racing, but the film simplifies the complex process of the GT40's development. It seems like Shelby was primarily visionary behind the car, but that doesn't fully align with the reality. Because this car was a significantly more structured effort within the Blue Oval engineering team, Shelby did play a role in managing the racing program and providing significant input into the car's performance, but other engineers, such as Roy Lunn and John Wyer, were equally crucial in the car's development. Shelby was responsible for overseeing the racing efforts, not for designing the car from the ground up. The process involved many experts from Ford, and the final test result was a product of collective effort, rather than the sole vision of one individual. According to movie creators, Shelby was the lone mastermind, but the fact is that the broader team effort remains clearly ignored. Although probably not as appropriate for dramatic purposes, The actual story behind Ford versus Ferrari is more fascinating than what we saw on the screen, filled with corporate strategy, engineering brilliance, and pursuit of victory. If you enjoyed uncovering these real events, be sure that these are just a few of them that came to mind. We could come up with part 2 soon enough, so make sure to subscribe and enjoy more interesting content from our channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.